Unit 6, Part 3. Focus on life as a Civil War soldier and also the Battle of Antietam. The Life as a Civil War Soldier notes will elaborate on the notes that you took in class using your textbook. Antietam is new information that is not mentioned heavily in the textbook. Therefore, you need to rely on these notes to get your information. Life as a Civil War soldier, as we know, was very different than life as a Revolutionary soldier. Much of their life was spent at camp, not on the battlefield. So this is where they would prepare and train for about 10 hours a day. This is also where they would get their food, sleep, get any health care that they might need. Although they spent most of their time at camp, many of these conditions were very harsh. They lacked clean water and lacked proper supplies to keep them dry. These wet conditions and also the lack of clean water caused diseases to spread. At this point in time, we don't have the medical technology to incorporate hygiene and proper basic health care, so that also causes diseases to spread. Some of the common diseases were typhoid fever, smallpox, and scurvy. Many of these diseases were deadly, or they would cause disfigurement of the body that would be permanent. This also led to malnutrition, which is basically when you don't have enough nutrition to be healthy or to have an immune system to overcome certain injuries or other smaller diseases. We're going to take a look at both the Union soldiers and the Confederates so that you have an idea of what I'm talking about or books are talking about in reference to them. Union soldiers fought for the North. You should know this already. They did not believe in slavery, and they wanted the country to stay together. These were their motivations for fighting. Soldiers were usually men in their 20s, usually working farm-type jobs where they might be used to handling a gun and heavy equipment, or they were drafted. Their uniforms were made of blue and made of wool, which they had in abundance in the North, not of cotton like you might think. That would be more of a southern material. The wool protected them from the cold and the rain. However, if they fought in the summer, that would be really, really hot. But wool was a better material to repel the type of conditions that would cause disease. And this separated them from the Confederates and also gave them an advantage. The Confederate soldiers were also usually men in their 20s. These soldiers fought for their ideals. They were pro-slavery and pro-states' rights. They felt like they needed to fight in order to create their own country separate from the United States. These men heavily went out to volunteer to fight. They did not need to have a draft, and so that was not issued. Their uniforms were gray, ragged, and handed down from dead soldiers. So they were not brand new. They didn't have the factories and industry to do that. So oftentimes they were mixed-matched, and sometimes it would be difficult to distinguish a Confederate from a Union soldier unless you look at the condition of the uniform. Their uniforms were not made out of the wool that would be repellent from the wet, and they also were not as warm. These Confederate soldiers carried rifle muskets instead of having a combination of repeating rifles and also the muskets. Both sides did use muskets, as we know from the technology part of our unit, and they both did use the mini ball, although it was more in abundance in the North. So the conditions that the Confederate soldiers had to face were at a disadvantage in comparison to the Union. Women and children were also involved in the war. Women mostly served as nurses, or they would work on the home front, especially in the North, to run industries or small businesses to keep the economy going, or they would create supplies that then would be shipped to the soldiers via the railroad system. There were also women spies that were very common, and also just like we had in the Revolutionary War, they were soldiers, oftentimes dressed as men. If you look in the picture on the slide, this is a woman dressed up as a man so that she could fight for the Confederate cause. Children were even involved with this war. 5% of the soldiers were under 18. They would often be drummer boys that would alert that fighting was about to begin, or messengers and carriers. These, although they were not fighting positions, still put them at risk and also helped to serve a communication purpose in the war. These are some pictures of some child soldiers. It's interesting to think about what it would have been like to be your age and fighting in a major war with the type of technology and disadvantages that each faced. Also the diseases that spread and how much more a child would be at risk than someone in their 20s. These are pictures from one of the prison camps. This is the Confederate prison camp in Andersonville, Georgia. This particular prison camp was known for its widespread death as they starved their prisoners to death. They also had very little hygienic practices, which caused a lot of diseases to spread. The man in the picture is alive. He is severely starved and malnourished, probably suffering from numerous diseases. The person who was in charge of the prison camp in Andersonville was actually tried for crimes against humanity and was executed for that crime. The quarters that they lived in prison camps helped to spread the disease because they were so cramped that people were literally on top of each other. If you see in this picture, they have tents upon tents upon tents. And here they have so many graves from the losses at Andersonville that you see the graves so tightly packed together. So the prisoners of war that would be at this camp would be Union soldiers. So this guy would be a Union soldier, and this was controlled by the Confederate Army. Although this is the most well known for its crimes against humanity, there is another camp in New York that we'll take a look at a few pictures. This is the camp in Elmira. It's very difficult to find pictures similar to the ones on the last slide of the victims of that prison camp, but you can see how they're very packed together. They almost had just as many loss of lives at Elmira as they did in Andersonville. This comparison of prison camps and their reputation also serves the purpose of showing bias. Our current government is ran by what was the Union government, and those were the victims in the Andersonville prison camp. So it could be that the government is trying to keep what the Union prison camp did from history books, and that definitely causes bias within our country. So that's just something to think about. What if the Confederates won? How would they view Elmira? Or if you interviewed a Confederate soldier, how would they view Elmira in comparison to Andersonville? The statistics show that they are very similar in how they treated soldiers and also the deaths, but Andersonville is the one where we see the very scary pictures and hear a lot about how the person in charge at Andersonville was executed for his crimes against humanity. We don't really hear about the people at Elmira. Now we're going to move into the Battle of Antietam. In this particular chapter, we're going to focus on battles that served as turning points or give good examples of some of the concepts we've discussed, like advantages in technology. The Battle of Antietam took place in 1862, which was the height of the war. This was the first attack on Union soil. It took place in Maryland at Antietam Creek, hence the name. Up until the Battle of Antietam, the Union had suffered repeated losses to the Confederates and were definitely in need of a win. Their morale was low, morale meaning how they felt about their camaraderie and if they were going to win and their motivation to fight. So their motivation and morale is very low. And they needed this win not only to encourage Lincoln to keep on fighting and to keep moving forward, but also to show the Confederates that they could put up a fight. The particular general at this battle was McClellan, and McClellan was a very hesitant general. Lincoln did have some issues with him regarding his decisions as a general. But in this particular battle, they were actually ended up gaining a victory for the Union. The Battle of Antietam is also known as one of the bloodiest days of the war, or the bloodiest day of the war. There are over 22,000 casualties just in one day. That is huge. However, this win did give Lincoln the confidence to launch the Emancipation Proclamation, which is the document that ensured that slavery would end in Union territory, so mainly in the border states, and then at the conclusion of the war, if they would win, then they would be freed in all other states. We'll discuss the Emancipation Proclamation in the next set of notes, but this battle is most important because of its motivational part in Lincoln's decision to launch the Emancipation Proclamation. This is a picture of Lincoln congratulating his generals at the Battle of Antietam. He often made appearances at battlegrounds, not when the fight was going on, but afterwards, in order to provide leadership